Far out in the southeastern Pacific Ocean, more than 3,000 kilometers from the coast of South America, lies one of the most isolated inhabited places on Earth. Known today as Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, this small volcanic landmass rises abruptly from the ocean, its windswept terrain marked by rolling grasslands, extinct craters, and rugged cliffs that descend sharply into the sea. At first glance, it appears austere, almost desolate. Yet scattered across its surface stand nearly 1,000 monumental stone figures, silent, immobile, and enduring. These are the Moai. Carved from volcanic rock, some towering over 10 meters in height and weighing more than 70 tons, the Moai have long captured global attention. Their elongated faces, heavy brows, and deep-set eyes convey an expression that is at once solemn and enigmatic. Positioned on ceremonial platforms called ahu, many face inland, overlooking the territories where communities once lived. Others remain unfinished, still attached to the bedrock of the quarry where they were first shaped. Together, they form one of the most remarkable archaeological landscapes in the world. Understanding how and why these statues were constructed requires entering a complex historical and cultural framework, one shaped by environmental conditions, social organization, and evolving belief systems. The story of the Moai is not defined by a single explanation, but by layers of evidence accumulated through decades of archaeological research, linguistic study, and oral tradition. The first known settlers of Rapa Nui are believed to have arrived between the 12th and 13th centuries, likely originating from East Polynesia. Navigating vast ocean distances using sophisticated knowledge of stars, currents, and wind patterns, these seafarers brought with them crops, domesticated animals, and cultural practices that would form the foundation of Rapa Nui society. Archaeological findings, including radiocarbon dating of charcoal and pollen samples, support this time frame, although earlier settlement dates have occasionally been proposed. Upon arrival, the island presented both opportunity and limitation. Its volcanic soil was fertile, capable of supporting agriculture, but its ecosystem was fragile. Palms once covered much of the landscape, alongside diverse plant and bird species. Over time, human activity, combined with the impact of introduced species such as the Polynesian rat, led to significant ecological changes. Deforestation, in particular, would later play a critical role in shaping the trajectory of the island's society. Within this environment, a distinct cultural system emerged. Rapa Nui society developed hierarchical structures centered around extended kin groups, each associated with specific territories. Leadership was often tied to lineage and spiritual authority, and competition between groups appears to have influenced both social organization and monumental construction. It is within this context that the Moai began to appear. Archaeological evidence indicates that the earliest Moai were relatively small and stylistically simpler. Over time, their size and complexity increased, suggesting an evolving tradition of monument building. Most of the statues were carved from compressed volcanic ash, known as tuff, sourced from a quarry located at Reno Raraku, an extinct volcanic crater that served as the primary production site. Reno Raraku remains one of the most significant archaeological locations on the island. Its slopes are dotted with partially carved figures, some emerging only faintly from the rock face, others nearly complete but never transported. These unfinished statues provide crucial insight into the carving process, preserving various stages of production that would otherwise be lost. The carving of a Moai began directly on the bedrock. Artisans used basalt tools, harder volcanic stones shaped into chisels, to gradually remove material and define the figure's form. The front of the statue was carved first, including the face, torso, and arms, which are typically depicted resting along the sides of the body. The back remained attached to the rock during most of this process. Once the front was completed, the statue was separated from the bedrock by cutting along its base. It was then maneuvered into an upright position, allowing artisans to finish carving the back. This sequence is supported by tool marks and the orientation of unfinished statues at the quarry, many of which lie at angles suggesting controlled detachment. The level of skill required for this work is evident in the consistency of the statue's proportions and features. While variations exist, particularly in size and detail, the overall style remains remarkably cohesive. This suggests not only technical proficiency, but also a shared cultural standard governing how the Moai were to be represented. The purpose of the Moai has been the subject of extensive study. Most scholars agree that they were associated with ancestor veneration. In Polynesian belief systems, ancestors often hold an ongoing presence within the living community, providing protection, guidance, and spiritual power. The Moai are thought to embody these ancestral figures, serving as intermediaries between the physical and spiritual realms. Supporting this interpretation is the placement of the statues. Positioned on ahu platforms along the coastline, they face inland, toward the areas where people lived and cultivated land. This orientation suggests a protective or watchful role, as though the ancestors were overseeing the community. Some statues originally had eyes made of white coral with pupils of obsidian or red scoria. When these eyes were inserted, the Moai were believed to become spiritually active or imbued with mana, a concept central to Polynesian cosmology, referring to a form of spiritual power or authority. The act of placing the eyes may have been part of a ceremonial process marking the statue's completion and activation. In addition to their symbolic function, the Moai likely played a role in reinforcing social structure. The construction and placement of statues required coordinated labor, access to resources, and organizational leadership. Larger and more numerous statues may have reflected the status or influence of particular groups, serving as visible expressions of prestige and identity. Despite these insights, one of the most persistent questions surrounding the Moai concerns their transportation. Many statues were moved several kilometers from the quarry to their final locations, often across uneven terrain. Given their size and weight, this task would have required considerable planning and effort. Various theories have been proposed to explain how the Moai were transported. Early European observers speculated that the statues were dragged on wooden sledges or rollers, an idea consistent with practices observed in other parts of the world. However, this explanation raises questions about the availability of large quantities of timber, particularly in light of evidence suggesting extensive deforestation on the island. More recent experimental archaeology has explored alternative methods. Some researchers have demonstrated that upright statues can be walked forward using a system of ropes, with teams of people rocking the statue from side to side. This method aligns with oral traditions recorded from Rapa Nui inhabitants, which describe the statues as having walked to their destinations. While these experiments show that such techniques are physically possible, debates continue regarding their practicality on a larger scale. Factors such as terrain, labor organization, and the risk of damage to the statues all contribute to ongoing discussions among scholars. What remains clear is that the transportation of the Moai was not a singular process, but likely varied depending on time, location, and available resources. Archaeological evidence, including roads, tool marks, and the distribution of statues across the island, suggests a complex and adaptive system rather than a single standardized method. As the number of statues increased, so too did the demands placed on the island's environment. The extraction of stone, the movement of large objects, and the construction of ceremonial platforms all required materials and labor. Over time, these activities, combined with agricultural expansion and the introduction of non-native species, contributed to significant ecological transformation. By the time European explorers first arrived in the 18th century, the island's landscape had changed dramatically. The once abundant palm forests were gone, and many of the statues had been toppled. The reasons for this shift remain a subject of scholarly investigation, involving factors such as resource depletion, social conflict, and cultural change. The Moai, however, endured. Even in their fallen state, they continued to shape perceptions of the island and its history. Early accounts by European visitors often misunderstood or misrepresented the significance of the statues, lacking the cultural context necessary to interpret them accurately. It would take centuries of research and collaboration with Rapa Nui descendants to begin reconstructing a more informed understanding. Today, the Moai stand not only as remnants of a past society, but as active elements of cultural identity. Ongoing archaeological work, combined with indigenous knowledge and stewardship, continues to refine interpretations of their construction and meaning. The question of how these statues were built and moved is no longer approached as an isolated mystery, but as part of a broader narrative, one that encompasses human adaptation, environmental change, and the enduring relationship between people and their ancestors. As the number of Moai across Rapa Nui increased, so too did the scale and sophistication of the society responsible for their creation. The island was no longer simply a place of settlement, but a landscape structured by ritual, memory, and competition. Each statue, positioned deliberately upon its ahu, formed part of a broader cultural system in which ancestry, land, and authority were closely intertwined. The ahu themselves were not merely platforms, but complex ceremonial structures. Built from carefully fitted stones, often without mortar, they served as both physical and symbolic foundations for the Moai. Some ahu contained burial chambers, linking the statues directly to the remains of ancestors. Archaeological excavations have revealed cremated human bones and grave goods within these structures, reinforcing their role in funerary and commemorative practices. The construction of an ahu required coordinated labor and engineering knowledge. Stones had to be transported, shaped, and assembled with precision to create stable platforms capable of supporting immense weight. The alignment of these structures, often parallel to the coastline, suggests deliberate planning rather than incidental placement. In some cases, the platforms were expanded or modified over time, indicating that they remained active sites within the community. As the tradition evolved, certain statues began to incorporate additional features. Among the most notable are the pukau, cylindrical stone elements placed atop the heads of some Moai. Carved from red scoria sourced at a different quarry, puna pau, these features are often interpreted as representations of headdresses or topknots, possibly reflecting hairstyles worn by high-status individuals. The addition of pukau introduced new logistical challenges. Transporting these large, heavy cylinders from a separate quarry and raising them onto already standing statues required further innovation. Some scholars suggest the use of ramps constructed from stone or earth, allowing the pukau to be rolled upward and positioned carefully. Others propose levering techniques using ropes and wooden supports. While no single method has been universally accepted, the presence of pukau demonstrates an increasing level of architectural and organizational complexity. Beyond their physical construction, the Moai were embedded within a system of belief that extended across the island. The concept of mana, central to Polynesian cosmology, is often invoked to explain the significance of the statues. Mana can be understood as a form of spiritual potency or authority, derived from both ancestral lineage and personal achievement. In this context, the Moai were not simply representations of ancestors, but vessels through which mana could be concentrated and expressed. The placement of statues facing inland supports this interpretation. Rather than gazing out toward the sea, they appear oriented toward the communities they were meant to influence. Their presence may have been understood as actively contributing to the well-being of the land, ensuring agricultural fertility and social stability. In this sense, the Moai functioned as both spiritual guardians and markers of territorial identity. Archaeological surveys have identified networks of roads radiating outward from Reino Raraku, the primary quarry. These roads, in some cases leveled and bordered by stones, appear to have facilitated the movement of statues across the island. Along these routes, numerous Moai have been found in various states of transport, some upright, others fallen. Their distribution provides valuable evidence for understanding how the statues were moved. The positioning of these roadside Moai has led to ongoing debate. Some researchers interpret them as abandoned during transport, possibly due to accidents or logistical difficulties. Others suggest they may have been intentionally placed as part of a broader ritual landscape, serving as markers along ceremonial pathways. The evidence remains inconclusive, and interpretations continue to evolve as new data emerges. Experimental archaeology has played a significant role in testing hypotheses about transportation methods. In controlled settings, researchers have successfully moved replica statues using teams of people and rope systems. One widely discussed method involves keeping the statue upright and rocking it forward incrementally, creating a walking motion. This approach aligns with oral traditions recorded in the 19th and 20th centuries, in which islanders described the Moai as moving through the use of mana or specialized knowledge. While such experiments demonstrate feasibility, they also highlight the challenges involved. Maintaining balance, coordinating movement, and navigating uneven terrain would have required careful planning and skilled execution. The risk of damage to the statues, many of which show signs of breakage, suggests that not all transport attempts were successful. Alternative theories continue to be examined. Some scholars propose that statues were laid horizontally and dragged on sledges, possibly over lubricated surfaces or tracks made from wood or stone. Others explore the possibility of a hybrid approach, combining vertical and horizontal techniques depending on the stage of transport. The diversity of archaeological evidence supports the idea that multiple methods may have been used over time. The question of resources remains central to these discussions. The movement of large statues would have required not only labor, but also materials such as rope and possibly wood. The extent to which deforestation affected these processes is a matter of ongoing research. Pollen analysis and soil studies indicate a gradual decline in tree cover over several centuries, rather than a sudden collapse. This suggests that environmental change was complex and multifaceted, influenced by both human activity and ecological factors. As the island's ecosystem shifted, so too did its social dynamics. Evidence from settlement patterns, tool distribution, and dietary remains points to periods of adaptation and reorganization. Agricultural techniques evolved to cope with changing conditions, including the use of stone mulching to retain soil moisture and protect crops from wind. At the same time, the scale of monument construction appears to have reached its peak. Larger statues were produced, some exceeding 10 meters in height, though many of these remained unfinished at the quarry. The reasons for this are not fully understood. It is possible that changing social priorities, resource limitations, or internal conflict contributed to a decline in statue production. Oral traditions collected from Rapa Nui descendants speak of divisions between groups and episodes of upheaval. While such accounts must be interpreted carefully, they provide valuable perspectives that complement archaeological findings. Some scholars suggest that competition between clans may have intensified over time, with the construction of larger and more numerous moai serving as a means of asserting dominance. The eventual cessation of moai construction marks a significant turning point in the island's history. By the time of European contact in 1722, many statues had already been toppled. The reasons for this remain debated. Some researchers attribute it to intergroup conflict, during which opposing factions deliberately overturned each other's statues. Others propose that shifting belief systems led to the abandonment of earlier practices. One such shift may be reflected in the emergence of the birdman cult, a ritual system centered around the annual competition to retrieve the first egg of a migratory seabird from a nearby islet. This practice, documented in both oral tradition and early European accounts, appears to have replaced or supplemented earlier forms of ancestor veneration. The transition suggests a dynamic cultural landscape, responsive to changing conditions rather than static or isolated. Despite these transformations, the legacy of the moai endured. Their presence continued to shape the physical and symbolic environment of Rapa Nui, even as their original context evolved. For later generations, they remained powerful reminders of ancestral authority and collective achievement. European arrival introduced new variables into this already complex system. Early explorers recorded observations of the statues, often with limited understanding of their cultural significance. Some accounts described the moai in detail, noting their size and distribution, while others focused on the apparent decline of the society that had produced them. Subsequent contact brought disease, forced labor, and external pressures that would have profound effects on the island's population and traditions. By the 19th century, many aspects of Rapa Nui culture had been disrupted or lost. However, efforts to preserve and reconstruct knowledge continued, both among islanders and through collaborative research with external scholars. Modern archaeology has benefited from advances in technology and methodology, allowing for more precise analysis of materials, dating, and spatial relationships. Techniques such as ground-penetrating radar, 3D mapping, and isotopic analysis have contributed to a more nuanced understanding of how the moai were created and integrated into the landscape. Excavations around the statues have revealed that many extend far below the surface, with bodies buried over time by sediment. These subsurface features include carved details not visible from above ground, providing further insight into their design and significance. The discovery challenges earlier assumptions that the Moai consisted only of heads, highlighting the importance of comprehensive study. The quarry at Reino Raraku continues to be a focal point for research. Its unfinished statues, numbering in the hundreds, offer a snapshot of the production process at various stages. Some remain partially attached to the bedrock, while others lie detached but never transported. The reasons for their abandonment are not definitively known, but they suggest a sudden or gradual interruption in activity. Interpreting these findings requires careful consideration of multiple lines of evidence. No single explanation fully accounts for the complexity of the Moai's construction and distribution. Instead, scholars draw upon a combination of archaeological data, environmental studies, and oral history to build a layered understanding. What emerges is not a narrative of mystery in the sense of the inexplicable, but one of intricate human endeavor. The Moai reflect a society capable of organizing large-scale projects, adapting to environmental constraints, and expressing deeply held beliefs through material form. Their construction was not an isolated phenomenon, but part of a broader pattern of monument building observed across Polynesia. However, the scale and concentration of statues on Rapa Nui remain unique, shaped by the island's particular geography and historical trajectory. In examining the Moai, attention increasingly turns toward the people who created them, not as abstract figures of the past, but as individuals navigating challenges, making decisions, and leaving behind a tangible record of their world. The statues stand as evidence of that process, their forms shaped by both intention and circumstance. As research continues, new questions arise alongside established interpretations. How were labor groups organized? What social mechanisms supported such sustained construction efforts? To what extent did environmental change influence cultural transformation? These questions remain central to ongoing inquiry, guiding future exploration of one of the most compelling archaeological landscapes on Earth. By the later phases of Moai construction, the landscape of Rapa Nui had become deeply structured by human activity. The island was no longer simply inhabited, it had been systematically shaped, its geography intertwined with ritual, production, and subsistence. The distribution of statues, ceremonial platforms, agricultural features, and habitation sites reveals a society operating through coordinated systems rather than isolated efforts. One of the most revealing aspects of this system lies in the organization of labor. The carving, transport, and installation of Moai required sustained collective effort. While no written records from the pre-contact period exist, archaeological patterns suggest that work was likely organized along kin-based lines, with different groups responsible for specific tasks. The quarry at Reino Raraku, for example, shows evidence of long-term, repeated activity, indicating that teams of artisans may have worked there continuously over generations. The tools used in carving provide insight into the technological framework of this process. Basalt picks, known locally as toki, have been found in large quantities at quarry sites. These tools, shaped from dense volcanic rock, were capable of gradually cutting into the softer tuff. Experimental studies have shown that while the process was labor-intensive, it was effective when carried out by skilled workers. The marks left on unfinished statues correspond closely with the use of such implements, reinforcing the connection between tool and technique. The consistency of Moai design also points toward shared knowledge and training. While individual statues vary in size and proportion, their defining features, elongated heads, prominent noses, and stylized torsos, follow a recognizable pattern. This suggests that artisans adhered to established conventions, possibly transmitted through apprenticeship or communal instruction. At the same time, subtle differences between statues may reflect local identities or evolving stylistic preferences. Beyond the quarry, the island's infrastructure reveals further complexity. The network of roads associated with Moai transport appears to have been intentionally constructed. Some pathways are leveled or bordered by stones, forming routes that connect Reino Raraku to various Ahu sites. The gradients of these roads have been studied in detail, with some researchers noting that they often follow contours that would facilitate controlled movement of large objects. Along these routes, the presence of partially transported Moai continues to draw attention. Some lie face down, others on their backs, and a few remain upright. Their distribution is not random. In several cases, they are positioned at intervals that correspond with changes in terrain, such as slopes or bends in the path. This has led to interpretations that these locations may have functioned as resting points or staging areas during transport. Alternatively, some scholars propose that these statues were never intended to reach an ahu. Instead, they may have been deliberately placed along roads as part of a broader ceremonial landscape. According to this view, the act of movement itself held significance, and the journey from quarry to destination was not merely logistical but ritualized. The evidence supporting this interpretation remains debated, and it is possible that both explanations apply in different contexts. The question of how the Moai were physically moved continues to be examined through both archaeological evidence and experimental reconstruction.
The walking hypothesis, in which statues are rocked forward in an upright position using ropes, has gained attention due to its alignment with oral traditions and successful modern demonstrations. In these experiments, teams of participants coordinate their movements to shift the statue incrementally, maintaining balance through controlled tension. However, this method is not without limitations. It requires a high degree of coordination and may be less effective on uneven or steep terrain. Additionally, the wear patterns observed on some statues do not always correspond neatly with this technique. As a result, other methods remain under consideration. Horizontal transport using sledges or rollers, possibly combined with lubrication from plant materials, has been proposed as an alternative or complementary approach. The diversity of statue sizes adds further complexity to the discussion. Smaller Moai may have been moved using different techniques than larger ones, and the choice of method may have evolved over time. Archaeological evidence does not point to a single uniform system, but rather a range of practices adapted to specific conditions. The installation of a Moai onto an ahu represents another stage of considerable technical difficulty. Once transported to its destination, the statue had to be raised into an upright position and secured on the platform. Several theories have been proposed to explain this process. One suggests the use of earthen ramps, allowing the statue to be gradually elevated and then lowered into place. Another involves levering the statue upward in stages, using stones or wooden supports to stabilize it between lifts. Evidence for these methods is indirect, as few clear remains of ramps or lifting have been identified. However, the positioning of statues on ahu, often precisely aligned and balanced, indicates that effective techniques were developed. The addition of pu cow further complicates this process, as these elements had to be raised and positioned after the statue itself was in place. The presence of eyes, inserted into some statues after installation, adds another layer of meaning. These eyes, typically made from white coral with darker pupils, were placed into carved sockets on the face. Their insertion is thought to have marked the final stage of activation, transforming the statue from a carved object into a spiritually significant presence. Not all statues have preserved eyes, but those that do provide valuable insight into this aspect of ritual practice. As the Moai tradition expanded, it became increasingly intertwined with the island's environmental conditions. The decline of large tree species, particularly palms, has been documented through pollen analysis and the study of sediment cores. This process unfolded over several centuries, suggesting a gradual transformation rather than a sudden collapse. Human activities such as land clearing for agriculture, combined with the impact of introduced species, contributed to this change. The reduction in tree cover would have affected multiple aspects of daily life, including the availability of materials for construction and transport. If wood was used in moving statues, its scarcity may have necessitated alternative methods. At the same time, agricultural practices adapted to these conditions. The use of lithic mulching, spreading stones across fields to retain moisture and regulate temperature, demonstrates an innovative response to environmental challenges. These adaptations indicate that Rapa Nui society was not static, but responsive to changing circumstances. The continuation of Moai production during periods of environmental stress suggests that monument building remained an important cultural priority. However, the eventual decline in statue construction points to a shift in this balance. The reasons for this shift are complex and not fully understood. Archaeological evidence shows that many statues at Reino Raraku were left unfinished, some still attached to the bedrock. This suggests an interruption in production, but whether it was sudden or gradual remains uncertain. Possible factors include resource limitations, changes in leadership structures, or evolving belief systems. Oral traditions collected in the 19th century describe periods of conflict between groups, sometimes associated with the toppling of statues. While these accounts must be interpreted cautiously, they align with physical evidence of widespread statue overturning observed across the island. The timing and causes of these events continue to be studied, with some researchers linking them to social reorganization rather than simple collapse. The emergence of new ritual practices, such as the Birdman competition centered at Orongo, indicates a transformation in religious and political structures. This system, which involved annual contests to obtain a sacred egg, appears to have shifted focus away from the ancestral emphasis embodied by the Moai. The relationship between these traditions is still debated, but the transition suggests a dynamic cultural landscape. European contact in the 18th century introduced additional pressures, including disease and external exploitation. These factors had significant impacts on the island's population and social continuity. However, it is important to distinguish between changes that occurred before and after contact, as earlier interpretations often conflated the two. Modern research increasingly emphasizes the resilience and adaptability of Rapa Nui society. Rather than viewing the history of the Moai as a narrative of decline, scholars now explore how communities managed resources, maintained cultural practices, and navigated environmental constraints over time. Excavations and surveys continue to refine this understanding. The use of advanced technologies, such as geographic information systems and 3D modeling, allows researchers to analyze spatial relationships and construction techniques with greater precision. These tools have revealed patterns in statue placement, road networks, and quarry activity that were not previously apparent. At the same time, collaboration with Rapa Nui descendants plays an essential role in interpreting these findings. Indigenous knowledge, preserved through oral tradition and cultural practice, provides context that cannot be derived from material evidence alone. This partnership has become a central component of contemporary archaeological work on the island. The Moai, in this light, are not isolated artifacts but part of an integrated system of meaning, labor, and environment.
Their construction reflects a convergence of technical skill, social organization, and spiritual belief. Each stage, from quarrying to carving, transport, and installation, represents a coordinated effort shaped by both tradition and adaptation. As research progresses, the focus continues to shift from singular explanations toward a more holistic perspective. The question is no longer simply how the Moai were built, but how they fit within the broader fabric of Rapa Nui life. This approach recognizes that the statues cannot be fully understood in isolation, but must be considered within the interconnected systems that produced and sustained them. In this context, the enduring presence of the Moai serves as a point of continuity. Despite changes in environment, society, and external influence, they remain a defining feature of the island. Their forms, carved from volcanic stone and shaped by human hands, continue to embody the complexities of a culture that engaged deeply with both its physical surroundings and its ancestral past. By the time sustained European contact began in the 18th century, the cultural landscape of Rapa Nui had already undergone significant transformation. When the Dutch navigator Jacob Roggeveen arrived in 1722, he encountered an island marked by the presence of numerous standing and fallen Moai, alongside a population whose social and environmental conditions differed from what earlier centuries might have supported. His accounts, though limited and shaped by unfamiliarity, provide one of the earliest written observations of the statues in situ. Subsequent visits by Spanish and British expeditions during the 18th century added further descriptions, often noting both the scale of the monuments and the apparent decline of the society responsible for them. However, these early accounts must be interpreted cautiously. Observers had limited time on the island and often lacked understanding of Polynesian cultural systems. Their reports, while valuable, reflect partial perspectives shaped by external assumptions. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, many Moai had been deliberately toppled. Archaeological evidence indicates that this was not the result of natural forces alone. The statues were often found lying face down, suggesting intentional action. Oral traditions recorded later describe conflicts between groups, during which opposing factions overturned each other's statues as acts of symbolic and political defiance. While the precise timing of these events remains debated, the pattern of widespread toppling points to a period of social upheaval. The reasons behind this shift are complex and cannot be attributed to a single cause. Some scholars emphasize internal factors, including competition between kin groups, changes in leadership structures, and evolving belief systems. Others highlight environmental pressures, noting that the gradual loss of tree cover and changes in resource availability may have contributed to tensions within them. It is increasingly understood that Rapa Nui did not experience a sudden collapse, but rather a series of adaptations and transformations over time. Archaeological data suggests that the population continued to practice agriculture and maintain social organization even after large-scale Moai construction had ceased. Techniques such as stone mulching and the creation of rock gardens allowed for continued food production under changing environmental conditions. The emergence of the Birdman ritual, centered at the ceremonial village of Orongo, represents one of the most significant cultural developments during this later period. This system involved an annual competition in which participants sought to retrieve the first egg of the sooty tern from a nearby islet. The winner, or their sponsor, would assume a position of authority for the year. Petroglyphs and architectural remains at Orongo provide evidence of the importance of this practice. Scholars debate the relationship between the Birdman cult and the earlier Moai-centered system. Some interpret it as a replacement, marking a shift away from ancestor veneration toward a different form of ritual authority. Others suggest that elements of both systems may have coexisted for a time, reflecting a gradual transition rather than an abrupt change. The evidence remains open to interpretation, and ongoing research continues to explore this relationship. The arrival of European ships introduced new and often devastating factors into the island's history. Contact brought diseases to which the local population had no prior exposure, resulting in significant demographic decline. In the 19th century, slave raids carried out by external groups further reduced the population, removing many individuals who held cultural knowledge and social roles. These events disrupted the transmission of traditions and contributed to the loss of historical continuity. Despite these challenges, aspects of Rapa Nui culture persisted. Oral traditions were preserved and later recorded by missionaries and researchers, providing valuable insights into the island's past. While these accounts were often documented after significant disruption had occurred, they remain an important source of information when considered alongside archaeological evidence. The study of the Moai and their construction entered a new phase in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as scholars began to conduct more systematic investigations. Early interpretations sometimes reflected misconceptions, including assumptions about external influence or the inability of the island's inhabitants to have created such monuments independently. Over time, these views were reassessed as more evidence became available. Archaeological research increasingly demonstrated that the Moai were the product of local innovation and cultural development. Excavations at Reino Raraku revealed the full scope of the quarry, including hundreds of statues in various stages of completion. Detailed analysis of tool marks confirmed the use of basalt implements, while the study of unfinished figures provided insight into the sequence of carving. Further work at Ahu sites clarified their construction and function. The discovery of burial remains within these platforms reinforced their connection to ancestor veneration. The orientation and distribution of statues across the island were mapped with greater precision, revealing patterns that corresponded with territorial divisions and social organization. In the latter half of the 20th century, experimental archaeology began to play a more prominent role. Researchers sought to test hypotheses about how the Moai were transported and erected, using replicas and reconstructed tools. These experiments demonstrated that multiple methods were feasible, including both horizontal dragging and upright walking techniques. While no single approach has been definitively established as universal, the results support the conclusion that the statues could have been moved using locally available resources and coordinated human effort. At the same time, environmental studies contributed to a more nuanced understanding of the island's ecological history. Analysis of pollen, charcoal, and sediment cores provided evidence of gradual deforestation over several centuries. This process was influenced by a combination of human activity, such as land clearing and resource use, and the impact of introduced species, particularly the Polynesian rat, which affected tree regeneration. These findings challenged earlier narratives that emphasized rapid ecological collapse as the primary driver of social change. Instead, researchers now emphasize a model of long-term interaction between human society and the environment, characterized by both impact and adaptation. The continuation of agricultural practices and the development of new techniques suggest resilience rather than simple decline. In recent decades, advances in technology have further expanded the scope of research. High-resolution mapping, satellite imagery, and digital modeling have allowed for detailed analysis of the island's features. These tools have been used to study road networks, statue distribution, and quarry activity, revealing patterns that were not previously visible. Excavations around standing Moai have uncovered buried portions of statues, including torsos and carved details that had been obscured by sediment. These discoveries have altered earlier perceptions, demonstrating that many statues were more complex in form than initially assumed. The presence of petroglyphs and other markings on these buried sections adds another dimension to their interpretation. Collaboration with Rapa Nui descendants has become an essential component of modern research. Local knowledge, cultural practices, and perspectives contribute to a more comprehensive understanding of the statues and their significance. This approach recognizes that the Moai are not only archaeological objects, but also part of a living cultural heritage. Efforts to preserve and restore the Moai have been ongoing, particularly in response to environmental factors such as erosion and weathering. Conservation projects have involved both local communities and international organizations, working together to stabilize structures and document their condition. These initiatives aim to ensure that the statues remain accessible for future generations while respecting their cultural importance. The interpretation of the Moai continues to evolve as new evidence emerges. Scholars remain cautious in drawing conclusions, particularly when addressing questions that lack definitive answers. The emphasis has shifted toward integrating multiple lines of evidence, including archaeology, environmental science, and oral tradition, to construct a balanced and informed narrative. In this context, the Moai are understood not as isolated enigmas, but as part of a broader system shaped by human decision-making, environmental interaction, and cultural expression. Their construction reflects a capacity for organization and innovation, while their subsequent history illustrates the complexities of adaptation and change. The enduring presence of the statues invites continued inquiry. Each new discovery contributes to a deeper understanding of how they were created, why they were significant, and how they fit within the wider history of Rapa Nui. Rather than offering a single, definitive explanation, the evidence points toward a dynamic process, one that unfolded over centuries and continues to be explored today. In the present day, the Moai of Rapa Nui stand within a framework that extends beyond archaeology alone. They exist at the intersection of cultural heritage, scientific inquiry, and global awareness. While their physical forms remain rooted in the volcanic stone from which they were carved, their meaning continues to evolve through ongoing research and the perspectives of the Rapa Nui people themselves. Modern investigations increasingly emphasize context over isolated explanation. The Moai are now understood as part of an integrated cultural system, one that includes quarry sites, transport routes, ceremonial platforms, agricultural landscapes, and habitation areas. Each of these elements contributes to a broader understanding of how the statues were conceived, constructed, and sustained within the society that produced them. One of the most significant developments in recent decades has been the application of advanced scientific techniques. Methods such as radiocarbon dating, isotopic analysis, and high-resolution topographic mapping have refined the chronology of settlement and construction on the island. These tools allow researchers to establish more precise timelines, helping to clarify when different phases of Moai production occurred and how they corresponded with environmental and social changes. Geochemical analysis of stone materials has also provided insight into resource use. By identifying the specific origins of different types of rock, including tuff and red scoria, researchers can trace patterns of quarrying and distribution. This work confirms that the majority of Moai were carved at Reino Raraku, while the Pucau originated from the separate quarry at Punapau. The movement of these materials across the island underscores the level of coordination involved in monument construction. In addition to scientific methods, landscape archaeology has become an important approach. Rather than focusing solely on individual statues, this perspective examines how features are arranged across the island. The alignment of a Hu along the coastline, the orientation of statues facing inland, and the placement of roads connecting key sites all point to deliberate spatial organization. These patterns suggest that the Moai were integrated into a network of meaning that extended beyond their immediate surroundings. The relationship between the statues and agricultural practices has also drawn increasing attention. Some studies propose that the placement of Moai may be associated with areas of productive land or freshwater sources. In this interpretation, the statues could have functioned not only as spiritual symbols but also as markers linked to resource management. While this hypothesis is still under investigation, it highlights the possibility that practical and symbolic considerations were closely connected. The question of transportation, long central to discussions of the Moai, continues to be explored through both experimental and analytical means. Recent work has examined where patterns on the bases of statues, seeking to determine whether they were moved in an upright or horizontal position. Some findings support the idea that at least certain statues were transported upright, consistent with the walking hypothesis. However, other evidence suggests that multiple methods may have been used, depending on factors such as size, distance, and terrain. Rather than seeking a single definitive answer, researchers increasingly accept that the process was likely variable. This perspective aligns with broader understandings of human ingenuity, recognizing that different solutions can emerge in response to changing conditions. The Moai, in this sense, reflect not a fixed technique but an adaptable set of practices developed over time. Equally important is the role of Rapa Nui communities in shaping contemporary interpretations. The island is not an abandoned archaeological site but a living cultural landscape. For its inhabitants, the Moai are not merely remnants of the past but part of an ongoing identity. Efforts to preserve language, traditions, and historical knowledge contribute to a deeper and more inclusive understanding of the statues. Collaborative research projects now often involve local participation, ensuring that investigations are conducted with cultural sensitivity and respect. Oral histories, while sometimes recorded after periods of disruption, provide valuable perspectives that complement material evidence. When considered alongside archaeological data, these accounts help to illuminate aspects of meaning that might otherwise remain obscured. Conservation presents another significant challenge. Exposure to wind, rain, and salt spray gradually erodes the volcanic stone, while human activity introduces additional pressures. Managing tourism, which brings both economic benefits and environmental impact, requires careful planning. Protective measures, including controlled access to certain sites and ongoing monitoring of structural stability, are part of broader efforts to safeguard the Moai. International recognition of Rapa Nui as a site of global heritage has increased awareness of these issues. At the same time, it has reinforced the importance of local stewardship. Decisions about preservation and presentation are increasingly made with input from the Rapa Nui community, reflecting a shift toward more inclusive management practices. The interpretation of the Moai has also moved away from earlier narratives that emphasized mystery in isolation. While questions remain, they are now approached within a framework grounded in evidence and comparative analysis. The statues are understood as part of a continuum of Polynesian cultural expression, sharing elements with other traditions while developing unique characteristics in response to the island's specific context. In examining their construction, attention is directed not only toward the technical aspects but also toward the social systems that supported them. The ability to mobilize labor, coordinate resources, and maintain shared cultural practices over generations points to a society of considerable complexity. The Moai, therefore, are not simply objects to be explained, but indicators of broader patterns of organization and belief. Debates continue in several areas. The precise mechanisms of transport, the reasons for the cessation of statue production, and the relationship between environmental change and social transformation remain subjects of ongoing research. In each case, scholars draw upon multiple forms of evidence, acknowledging both what is known and what remains uncertain. This cautious approach reflects a broader shift in the study of Rapa Nui. Rather than seeking definitive conclusions in the absence of complete data, researchers emphasize the importance of balanced interpretation. Statements are framed in terms of probability and evidence, allowing for the possibility of revision as new information becomes available. The Moai themselves, however, remain constant in their physical presence. Whether standing upon restored ahu or lying where they were once toppled, they continue to define the visual and cultural landscape of the island. Their forms, shaped by human hands centuries ago, endure as tangible connections to a complex and evolving history. In reflecting on their construction, it becomes clear that the question is not solely how they were built, but why such an undertaking was sustained for so long. The answer lies in the interplay of belief, identity, and environment. The Moai represent ancestors, authority, and continuity, embodying relationships that extended across generations. At the same time, their history illustrates the capacity of human societies to adapt. Changes in environment, shifts in social structure, and external influences all contributed to the transformation of Rapa Nui over time. The cessation of Moai construction did not mark the end of cultural expression, but rather a transition into new forms. Today, the statues stand as reminders of that process. They are neither relics of an inexplicable past nor symbols of decline, but evidence of a society that engaged deeply with its surroundings and its heritage. Through careful study and respectful preservation, their story continues to be refined, offering insight into both the specific history of Rapa Nui and the broader patterns of human experience. In the end, the Moai do not present a single unanswered question, but a series of interconnected inquiries. Each statue, each quarry, each pathway contributes to an ongoing dialogue between past and present. The work of understanding them is not complete, and perhaps never will be. Yet it is within this process of inquiry, grounded in evidence, open to revision, and attentive to context, that their significance continues to unfold.